And this is the 116 F3 in a nutshell. A tank which only needs a little bit of help before it actually might be useful and fun to play. However, it isn't. It is not. It was 2 weeks of grinding a ClanWars campaign to get this pile of crap. So, what is this tank? It's a Chinese tier 10 heavy tank with a 3-shot autoloader with 530 alpha, which is kind of wicked, 5-second interclip, which isn't, 2100 DPM, which is yikes, amazing frontal armor with some weak spots, which can't side scrape, we get to that in just a bit, and very, very, very poor gun handling and poor mobility. That is this tank in a nutshell. And before we go into the tank itself, I wanna say that there will be some people now writing in the comment section, oh my god, Raging, why are you so elitist? Why should a ClanWars reward vehicle always be overpowered? And I wanna say, I am one of the first people crying hard for the Chieftain and the 279 to finally be nerfed. It's not fun anymore to play basically 6 years the same meta. At least it feels like 6 years. I think it's around 4 years, I'm not entirely sure. But in the end, it's not fun to constantly play Chieftain, 279, Chieftain, 279, 279, Chieftain all the time. In ClanWars, it's boring. I'm actually glad when I'm able to play something like a CS 63, because it's finally something different and not always Chieftain. But I think you will agree with me that when you look at a tank like the 121B or the Ape King and M60, you will say that those tanks are fairly balanced. They have a pretty decent-ish style, like the 121B being a little bit of a Chinese copy of what a Leopard 1 would be. Great gun handling, great DPM, good mobility, some armor, but it doesn't have the 420 alpha and doesn't have the big speed which the Leopard 1 has. But I do believe that most of you will say, yo, you know what, the 121B isn't overpowered, it is not underpowered, it is a good tank. Fun to play against and fun to play yourself. And the same goes for the M60. I might even go as far as saying that most of you think that the 907 isn't overpowered or too OP or too mean to play against. And some would even say that the Karo is fair to play against as well. It is not good, the Karo. A lot of people dislike it. Just look at Ducky, look at Karo Berry. The gun handling is whack, and that already a little bit destroys the tank. But then you have the 116 F3 with its even more extremes. Insane armor, or at least somewhat insane armor. Potato gun handling, potato DPM, and potato mobility. Just fun to play. Like again, I looked a little bit of Ducky's stream, and Ducky is definitely like 50% better than me. He is an insane player. And he was coping and molding and sieving even more than I was, because the 116 F3 is this poor to play. I personally played the tank with Vents, Stabilizer, and improved aiming unit. All being bonds except for the improved aiming unit, which was Bounty. Ducky played Stabs, which was bond, HP, and Turbo. With the reasoning, and this is a pretty decent reasoning as well, there is no point to make a dogshit gun almost bearable when you are compromising everything else of the tank, aka the mobility, which is already pretty poor. But with the Turbo, it's acceptable. And losing, for example, the ability to not get insta-detract. With this tank, which is quite long, it's literally a wide boy or a long boy, being very annoying. And while we're talking about long boys, let's look at the armor when this Orbit 704 just penetrated us. Because there are some unique spots for this tank to be penetrated in. Again, the armor itself is kinda cracked on paper. Let's go into a live model view and let's take just standard rounds. With just 266 penetration, which is pretty good. But you can see red. Everywhere it's red. Lower plate, 45%. Cupola, pretty tiny. Turret, yeah, down there. Omega lol, I guess. If you go in the hull down, yes, the hull starts to get big. Now we load premium round, and as you can see now, it's basically the hull is pretty decent to penetrate. And this is where the 704 penetrated us. It's a pretty small spot, but you can penetrate there. It is a weak spot, aka 300 millimeters of armor. A little bit down low, it's 288 effective. And you still have the cupola, which is 120 millimeters thick, but you can see it's pretty far back. It's not impossible to hit, trust me, I got nailed quite a bit while playing it myself in that cupola, but it's pretty small. And the tank can bounce a pretty decent amount of armor, amount of rounds. But the problem is, again, you are paying a lot for this, in quotation mark, insane armor. Again, you don't have a lot of hit points, 2,100 to be, I think it is, 2,100. Yep. Which is pretty low, especially for a slow tank. And now get this. We take standard rounds, and you can see frontally, whoa, you basically barely can penetrate except for the lower plate and the cupola. But if this tank is on a, what's it called? Flat surface, and you want a side scrape, you do this, right? You start to do eep. Oh. Oh. Welcome to the 116F3's other weak spot. it's 100%. You know what the issue is with this weak spot? It's fairly hard to see usually. So let's just quickly try to change it like that. It's very hard to see still in this angle. It is back here. Let's go to the visual model. It's right here. It is hidden by all these boxes right here. It is basically the same weak spot the Super Conqueror has, just the Super Conqueror's weak spot is 300 millimeters thick and not 120 to 180. So now you basically know where to always penetrate the 116F3 if it decides to side scrape. Just go for there. And even if you load premium rounds, doesn't matter. With standard rounds, it's a pretty easy penetrating hit as well. It doesn't even need to angle that much, because that is not a hard angle. That is fairly thick angle, as you can see. But still, 200 millimeters, even tier 8s can penetrate there. It's pretty okay, in my opinion, that it has weak spots like this. But then again, it just is in a stark contrast to something like that as well, where it's basically everything is unpennable. But the tank has another issue, which is called it likes to burn. It's a Chinese firecracker, like the BZ tanks. It's the Chinese-Russian post-World War tank school. Everything here, and I think even here, I'm not sure though, but everything here at least is fuel tank and ammo rack. Especially fuel tank. In IRL, it's perfectly suited to catch spall. In World of Tanks, it's perfectly suited to get burned. So keep that in mind. You just shoot here, and after like 3 or 4 rounds, bare minimum, this tank is going to burst into flames. But let's move back to the replays. So now you know how to penetrate it rather easily. You could just see the hole right there. But again, even now we can even bait the VC55 because it looks like he doesn't know how to pen us. And he doesn't know that we are now basically very, 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 very long reloaded. Or take very long to reload. And he can't really do anything. He's just giving us free spot damage, which is pretty darn okay. By the way, for the people which are asking, should I take this or the Caro? Fairly simple. I believe that the Caro is just better. It also has pretty decent turret armor. It has 4-second and not 5-second interclip. It has the same clip potential, technically. Although I do want to point that out that the clip takes even longer. It takes not 10 seconds but 12 seconds. However, because it's an auto reloader, it makes it a lot more convenient to use because you don't always have to go for a reload, because we get many times situations where the 116F3 is just, oh, I just shot 2 shots. I still have 1 left, but I guess I have to reload for 36 seconds so I can do anything again. A little bit unfortunate. And you can see just how slow this tank is to accelerate. However, again, I'm not using a turbo, which might be a mistake. I should probably go for turbo, HP and stabs, and maybe HP, stabs and wins probably. By the way, pretty decent blind shot if I do say so myself. Maybe able to win us the game. One thing which is actually pretty decent about the 116F3 is it does have good fuel range. It's 400 meters of base, which is pretty decent. We can work with that. But this game is now more or less over because we are too slow to get into a position. So now we get Paris, which should be technically a really, really good map. But you can see Kranman and M103 were already much faster in the position. So we do a little bit of a peek around, and you can see it's basically impossible to snapshot with this tank. And I guess this is also why Ducky said that in the end it doesn't really matter what you're taking, as long as it has a V-stabs. But then again, don't focus on the gun. There's no point in focusing onto the gun, because it takes so long to aim in. It is so inaccurate on the move. This tank is basically like the VZ-114, but with an autoloader. It really feels almost the same, which is kind of pathetic. And again, you might say, oh my god, Raging, cry harder that you are crying about ClanWars reward vehicle not being overpowered. I don't want it to be overpowered. I want it to be playable. I want it to be decent to play and not just be like, oh my god, I want to rip out my hairs and mold. It's just frustrating to play, and I understand that it can also be frustrating to play for the enemies, which isn't a good thing either. Because in my opinion, the VC, the 116F3 is a Chinese Minotauro. It's frustrating to play for you, but it's also frustrating to play for the enemies, because they have, at least when you're in the hull down, and we all know how insane lately the maps have become, aka corridor, corridor, corridor with lots of hull down. It's also frustrating to play for the enemies. But nevertheless, this tank also kind of feels like a Foch 155 with a turret. And I believe that many of you, which know me for quite some time and know me from streaming, that if I take something as an example to the Foch 155, it's not a good thing. Only so little needs to be done with this tank, in my opinion, to make it more playable. I do believe the cupola being a little bit bigger would already make it much fairer to play against, and giving it better gun handling would also make it a lot more fun to play as. Because I don't believe that Wargaming needs to change the DPM. Yes, it is bad. And it's actually really, really good for the game to have such bad DPM, because it makes the games slower, you know? It's not those turbo games, and this tank really, really hates turbo games, because there are situations where you just get ruffle stomped, you did one clip and game over for you. Or you did one game, or you basically just drive behind your team because you're so slow. You make maybe 1 or 2 clips, good, 2000 damage, 2500 damage, and that's it. The game is over. Again, you need, for 2 clips you need 1 minute to reload, and lately, games last maximum of 5 sometimes. Guess this Paris game is an exception, for it's 9 minutes in the previous one. And this tank can excel in longer games, but usually you don't have those longer games. Yeah. It is frustrating. It's a frustrating tank to play against, and it's a frustrating tank to play yourself. In my opinion, very poor job by Wargaming to balance that. And before anybody of you are not going out and say, oh my god, the super testers are so bad, trust me, the super testers give feedback to make the tanks playable. But if Wargaming doesn't want to do that, it is what it is. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know in the comment section below what tank you want to see next. And now I'll see you around. Cheers.